Our next speaker is Emily Miller, and her talk is Emily Gets Her Gun, but Obama Wants to Take Yours. Emily Miller is the chief investigative reporter for the Fox affiliate WTTG Channel 5 in Washington, D.C. She previously served as senior editor at the Washington Times and a columnist at AOL. Her journalism experience includes being a producer of ABC News This Week and Good Morning America. Emily Miller served as deputy press secretary at the Department of State for both secretaries of state Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice. She also served as communication director to the Majority Whip Tom DeLay. She graduated cum laude at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Please welcome Emily Miller. Always hard to follow a big act, but I know you can do it.
I think I can do it. I'm talking about guns, that always brings out the interest. Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here, and so honored to be present with all of you guys. And I wish Mrs. Schlafly was here, but she's here in spirit and has set such an example for conservative women that those of us who are still out there are fighting for. So here, as I said, I'm talking about guns, and you can see, I've covered my book. I've got myself holding a gun, which is my own gun. But 3 years ago, this month, 3 years ago, I had never shot a gun in my life. I had never even thought about shooting a gun. definitely hadn't thought about owning a gun. But what changed me and what changed my perspective on this issue, which has become such a big issue in our nation's politics these days, is personal. I was the victim of a crime. I was dog sitting for friends in Washington, and those of you, I don't know if you're visiting or you're staying here for internships this summer, you've probably seen we have a lot of crime here in D.C., and I was dog sitting, and I walked out of the house where I was taking the dog, and I closed the front door, but I didn't lock it. And when I came back, it was just a few minutes, but I walked back inside, and there was a man in there robbing the house. And the police later said he's clearly a drug addict, and I confronted him. I didn't get hurt physically, but he stole my wallet, he left. Now I thought, which is a really dumb idea, never do this, is I was gonna follow him and get a picture and show the police. So I chased him down the street with at the time, my BlackBerry, now I have an iPhone, and got around the corner and found him standing outside with about 15 other men, 2 pickup trucks parked in the middle of the street, and all of a sudden they see me. And one of them started running at me. And I turned and quickly ran back behind as fast as I could back in the house, terrified, and called the police. And the police came and they dusted for fingerprints, and they sort of explained to me that this was a common thing now in D.C. where these drug addicts, drug dealers, whatever, from Virginia, because that did catch the license plates, I saw them, come into D.C., get their drugs, and on the way out, try to hit up a bunch of houses and get some quick cash. And so that's what I had walked into. And by the grace of God, I wasn't hurt. They didn't do anything to me, and thank God. But going to bed that night, I was terrified. What if they get back in? What if this happens again? What if, God forbid, they are surprised and they do act out and they are on drugs, and so you just don't know. And it was the first time in my entire life I thought, God, if I just had a gun, I'd have a chance to defend myself. And but I was just lying there. Instead, since I didn't have a gun, I took my friend's dresser and pushed it in front of the bedroom door to try to barricade myself in there for the night so I could sleep. But the next day, I just thought, this is crazy. I want to get a gun to defend myself. And so I went to at the time worked at the Washington Times, and went to my editor and said, I'm going to get a gun in D.C. I've heard that it's difficult. I really don't know what the situation is, but how about I write about it for the paper? And he said, that's fine. I said, I think it'll take a couple weeks. Well, D.C. has gun control laws that nowhere else in the country exist. And until the 2008 decision by the Supreme Court in Hellard case, which overturned the 30-year complete ban on ownership of guns, but D.C., even after that, the Supreme Court acted in Heller, they put together all these gun control laws. Everyone in the country that exists anywhere exists in D.C. So I started going through it, and I found I had to take a written test, and I found I had to take a class, and this is just to own a gun, to be clear. And it ended up, what I thought was going to take 2 weeks took 4 months, and it was 17 steps, and that was just to buy legally one gun that I'm not allowed to take out of the house. And so those of you who I can hear those few murmurs in the room, I'll bet you're from the South. or the West. Is that right? Look at all the nods. And those of you who aren't reacting, I'll bet you're from the Northeast. Because when you're from a blue state in the Northeast, and I say it took 17 steps in 4 months to get one gun that I can only keep at home, people are like, I don't get it. Because that's normal in a lot of these blue states. It's so hard to exercise your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Whereas in America, who recognizes that part of the Constitution, you go, that's shocking, because if you just go across the bridge right here to Virginia, which is, what, a mile away, you walk into a gun store, you are not a felon, you're not mentally ill, you're not a drug addict, all those things, you pass a federal background check, you may pass a state background check, instantaneous, all this information is in the system, except for mental health records, which is a major problem. But you walk out and you have your gun legally, and you can defend your family and your home. But a lot of these states have passed all these gun control laws. Well, so that's sort of what I decided to write this book, Emily Gets Her Gun, is because soon after as I said, 3 years ago, had never shot a gun, never owned a gun, I went through all of this and saw what gun control laws do. Very soon after that, we had two factors that came to bear. One is President Obama was reelected, and he had always been strongly anti-gun and strongly pro-gun control, openly so, before his Senate career, in his State House career. And so he was reelected, he's now a lame duck, and then the second horrific thing that happened was the terrible Newtown tragedy, in which 20 children and 8 teachers were shot and killed by a homicidal maniac. Now, I think all of us after Newtown, every human being, I wouldn't even say American, was just distraught over this. I mean, the idea of these children killed, these innocent children and these teachers. But what President Obama did, and what is different now in any gun control effort you've seen in the last 20 or 30 years, is he has Mike Bloomberg's money behind him. Mike Bloomberg, who's the billionaire former mayor of New York, is spending tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars, will spend all this money, and he's supporting Obama to push for gun control laws and using Newtown as their political reason, exploiting it, in my opinion, disgustingly so, exploiting Newtown to push for gun control laws. And you saw this drastic media coverage of this push for gun control law that started right after the Newtown tragedy. And I saw a lot of the media, which I'm part of, using emotion as opposed to fact in their coverage. You saw wall-to-wall coverage of gun control last year especially, all these issues coming up. But you don't hear facts. And so I just want to read to you a little bit of my book, and this is the chapter on media distortion. So, this is how the media is largely to blame for misconceptions about gun control. And there are two main reasons for the media distortion of the facts. If it bleeds, it leads is a saying that originally described local TV stations that started their news broadcasts about stories about violent crime victims, but it also applies equally now to the national media after a mass shooting. The Sandy Hook massacre was particularly horrific, as I said already, because the victims were innocent school children. But it was a rare event, not an increase in mass shootings. Nevertheless, the media went wall to wall with coverage from Connecticut for weeks. Then Obama, funded by Bloomberg, used this terrible crime to launch their plans to bring back the so-called assault weapons ban. But the media distortion goes beyond the fact that shootings and grisly deaths interest viewers and boost ratings. Anti-gun bias also plays a role. Mainstream media outlets are based in New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles. Few reporters are gun owners or have any familiarity with firearms. As a result, they are constantly making mistakes about simple gun terminology and functionality. Their ignorance of basic facts of firearms was widely exposed after the White House released a photo of President Obama's skeet shooting. Major print media outlets, including the New York Times, incorrectly labeled the gun a rifle instead of a shotgun. For those of you who don't know this, to be clear, a rifle shoots a single bullet straight, while a shotgun fires a shell that usually has many pellets that scatter in a wide area. Skeet shooting, which Obama claims to do all the time, we have not seen it since, but is done with a shotgun in order to have a chance at hitting the small, fast-moving clays. I've done it. It's very difficult to do. It would be impossible with a rifle. Rifles are what politically they're going after this assault weapons ban, not shotguns. Almost every newspaper, furthermore, uses the term assault weapon, I'm using air quotes, but they don't use the quotes in the papers, high-capacity magazine, sometimes clip incorrectly, without putting quotation marks around those terms. Those are political terms, and I go into that in my book also. Those are not functional terms. There's no such thing as an assault weapon. Reporters also use the words stockpile, arsenal, weapons of war, for the kinds of